Have you heard about Anchor? Well, it's one of the easiest ways to create a podcast. Not only is it 100% free, but it has a variety of creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or a computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast to other sites such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many others for you. And Anchor even allows you to make money from your podcast without a required minimum listenership. So whether you've been in the podcasting game for a long time or you're completely new to it, Anchor is so user-friendly that it's basically your one-stop shop for making a podcast. So what are you waiting for? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. You're listening to First Fossil. Because sometimes you simply need someone to help you take that first fossil. Hello and welcome to First Fossil, a show where we learn together how to take that first fossil toward becoming the best versions of ourselves. My name is Candace Olushala, and today's special guest is based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he is a fellow podcaster. He actually has a podcast called Absurdity Podcast. Definitely go check it out. And we actually went to the same alma mater, so it's pretty cool to have a fellow Southernite in my podcast. So without further ado, please welcome Ryan Becker. How have you been, Ryan?
I have been stressed out of my mind, but fantastic.
Why are we stressed?
Because in the last month, about a week before Thanksgiving, I started a new job, and then the day before Thanksgiving, got married. So all within like a week. So those two things happening within a week of each other. Now, I just decided what's the maximum amount of stress I can add to my life in a short amount of time. And then I just went with the first options that came to mind. And that's why I say, like, I'm happy beyond belief and love both of those new things in my life. But it was definitely, I'm looking forward to the break of the holidays coming up.
Oh my gosh. So you're a whole husband and you have a whole new job. That's a lot. I'm stressed for you. But Christmas is coming. The new year is coming. We will find the groove.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, bless you. Oh my gosh, that's a lot. But you're high spirited, so this is good.
Well, and my wedding was an elopement, which makes life like a million times easier and more affordable. So it's not like this was like a major wedding that we had to plan.
That's good. That definitely decreases some of the stress there. So that's fantastic. Congratulations on entering husbandry.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And prayers for my wife as she learns to put up with me.
Bless. Cover her, Jesus. Okay. My Lord. You can do it, Jesus. Be a
yes.
covering over her wifing with Ryan. Bless. Especially in your stress season. Lord, give her strength.
Yes. She has been a wonderful and welcome refuge from all of it. So.
Aw, I love that. I love that. Absolutely. So why don't you, in your own words, tell the people just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I hail from Orlando, Florida, grew up Seventh-day Adventist and was involved in ministry in most of my life in one way, shape, or form. Studied to become a pastor, was a pastor for a few years, moved into university recruiting for about 3 years. And then the new job that I've just transitioned into is as a podcast producer for a B2B podcast marketing production company called Sweetfish. It's a fully remote company, so I get to work from home now, which is great because I used to be traveling a lot, and now I get to spend my first year of marriage working from home, and I get to be present and cook and clean and do the things that I want to do without. I have also over the years had a number of physical problems. I have low back pain problems, and I've had most recently nerve issues in both of my arms and in my neck. And so the travel was actually starting to make those things actively worse. And so having the change of pace to be at home makes life a lot easier for me, both physically and logistically. And outside of that, I love playing tennis. I love podcasting. That's been a a passion of mine since about 2016. And it's that passion is what's led to me landing a full-time job within the industry, which is amazing. And I am just excited to see what's next in my life as I invest my time in my marriage and trying to downsize the different creative projects that I'm involved in so that I can give more of my attention to the things that I really want to focus on.
I really like that. You're a very well-rounded person to have all those different interests, and your your career trajectory is very eclectic too. You don't always hear people say that they were a former pastor doing the things that you do. I think I only know of maybe one other podcaster that was like, I was in the ministry full time for like 20 something years and now I'm one of the top podcasters. Like, you just don't hear
Yeah.
that story. And I don't think a lot of people expect pastors to leave their post, if you will. But I don't always see it as leaving your post as much as it's adjusting how you funnel what you do in general. And it just
Hmm.
doesn't look the way you expect it to look, but you're still doing your service. You're still, you know, pouring into people in some way, shape, or form, and that's what we're called to do. So that's really cool, Ryan.
Yeah, I love it. And you're right. I am still very much doing ministry in my university recruiting role. It was partially operating a traveling praise and worship ministry. And so those college students I was working with became sort of a de facto church to me. But, even in addition to that, my podcast has been a huge ministry tool. Even the episode we posted earlier this week, I've already seen comments on my YouTube channel of like, you guys as Christians are a breath of fresh air. I'd long sworn off the church. I thought all Christians didn't care about this, or all pastors were different. But you guys have shown that there's a different way to talk about these issues, or that there are people who care within the church. I've had others who are like, I'm going to give your denomination a second look, or Christianity a second look, and maybe I'll try going to church. It's just the things, the kind of the place that we meet people in through those discussions is really meaningful and really impactful. And creating the space to do that has been an awesome blessing, and has made a really big impression on my own life as I've grown in understanding what ministry looks like in my life too. And that's nothing against pastoring. It was just there were certain things going on in my life that made me realize that it's not that I didn't want to do pastoring full time for the rest of my life. I'd be fine stepping back into it if it was the right call and right role. But for me, where my emotional and personal needs were, as well as professional, I needed to make a shift back when I did. And so that's what I pulled off. And it's been an amazing journey.
I am passionate for you for this. That is just amazing, and I'm glad that you're able to recognize that and still speak to people in a way that have been craving to be catered to,
Yeah.
spoken to. So with all the things that are going on in your life, or that have been going on in your life, what for you was a crucial or vital first Basel experience for you that you learned from those experiences?
Yeah, I would say that in the midst of all of that, and it happened right after I shifted I stepped out of pastoral ministry and into the university recruiting role back in 2018. But in early 2019, I went down the road of getting diagnosed with ADHD,
Mm.
and that was when I was, I guess, 26 years old is when I decided to get diagnosed with it. And the obviously, really what I mean is I got tested for it and then received a diagnosis. It's not like I went to a doctor and said, diagnose me and then give me therapy and medication. It was more so, I think I have this. All signs point in the direction of me most likely having this. And, if I have it, then I'm fine with that. I just need to now learn the strategies and behavioral mechanisms that I need to put in place to account for it. And I want to get, the best treatment I can for it. And if I don't have it, cool, then I just need to figure out better ways anyway of dealing with the things that I feel like are slowing me down and creating issues for me. And that on its own was probably the single most transformative, on a personal level, transformative thing that I did in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. I mean, it just recontextualized my entire life, that diagnosis did. And I won't lie, it was also as exciting and as relieving as it was to finally receive the diagnosis. it was also an incredibly scary time. And it was actually, because of the diagnosis, actually a very mournful or very difficult time for me as well, because my whole life got recontextualized by it. So I would say the first step was actually just deciding to get tested and finding I did it through a psychologist's office here in town, and just finding that person and making that call to schedule the appointment was probably the first pivotal moment that I had in that journey.
Mm. Most people get diagnosed with ADHD when they're kids, when it's more evident. And I know in adults, we're taught, of course, I was practicing in pharmacy, and so we're taught that, in adulthood, ADHD might be seen differently, so people might not necessarily be able to recognize it as well in adults as they can in kids. But how did you decide? Because right now, I feel like there's so many different ways to even look for someone to diagnose you for something like this. There's
Hmm.
apps now, and the I feel like looking for a proper therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist is literally like shopping for a well-fitted suit. And
Hmm.
so how did you decide to even go the in-person route? And did you just like Yelp all these places and say, I'm just gonna try one and this looks like it has good ratings, I'm gonna just call and see what I can figure out?
Yeah, it was actually a lot harder than I thought it would be. And the reason for that is because, as it turns out, a lot more psychologists and psychiatrists are specializing in childhood ADHD rather than adulthood. And you're right that the symptoms look different, but outside of that, the signs and symptoms of ADHD also look different between genders. Much different, actually. For women, it's a lot more internalized and less on the hyperactive side. I tend to be more on the can't sit still, very restless side. But it also looks different because the signs are usually not as outward as they are for a kid. Like, for example, with a child, one of the telltale signs is they have it like every different sports equipment in their garage, because they go from one sport to another really quickly. But for me, the equivalent of that was having 4 podcasts running simultaneously while having a full-time job, while also doing this other thing over here on the side, and also doing this other thing, while also picking up a new hobby. If if someone were to watch the video episode of this, you can see behind me I have 4 yo-yos on the top shelf of my bookshelf behind me. I have way more than that, and that's just because I got really interested in yo-yos and got obsessed with it and went down that road. But just before that was playing cards and collecting unique decks of playing cards. And they're not that I play any big card games or anything. It was literally just, I think these are really cool, and wanted to collect some. The hallmark for me was, everyone had kind of just assumed I had ADHD for a while, and that was a big kind of write off for a lot of my behavior in the past. Was like, yeah, I probably have it. And that's what made the first call so scary, because if everyone assumed that I had it, and everyone and that was kind of my write off excuse of like, yeah, one day I'll get diagnosed, I just haven't yet. What happens if I go down that road and I don't have it? And what does that mean about me? What does that mean about the things that I struggle to get done that everyone else around me doesn't struggle to get done? I no longer have the excuse anymore if it isn't actually my diagnosis. And that became really scary. I actually kind of sat and froze by the phone for about 20, 30 minutes. First time in my life that had ever happened, because I was actually really scared to go down that road. And because of that reality of like, what if this is just me and I'm failing to cope with life like a normal human being? And that was a really heavy moment for me. And the way I found my psychologist was actually through a lot of, if you have employer based healthcare coverage, it's likely that through your insurer, you can find they have like a medical care provider lookup tool. And so that's actually, I just scrolled through. It took me a couple days worth of, I mean, not obviously like literally 48 hours worth of scrolling, but periodic scrolling through to try and find someone. And then calling and finding someone who took new patients. And I got lucky that it was first try was successful. And so that was that was how I found my psychologist. I actually haven't been back to that psychologist since I got the diagnosis. I am currently in the process of trying to find a therapist to work with me on the behavioral side, but I was able to do medication through my primary care doctor. And I don't like to say which medication publicly. All I will say, because I don't want to influence people one direction or another, other than to say I'm really grateful I have a doctor who's willing to ask me if how I'm feeling, how I'm, how comfortable I am on whatever dosage of medication I'm on, and is willing to switch it up at a moment's notice. Obviously through genuine conversation, and if she feels that it might be too far one direction or may not be the best idea, she'll let me know. But ultimately, she's taken the stance of this is for your comfort and so that you can feel like you can live your life the way you want to live it. And so I'm here to help you do that. So I just need you to communicate with me and we can make that happen. And so I've been really, really grateful to have a primary care doctor that cares like that and that gives me that kind of freedom and empowerment.
That is really actually great because not I'm the daughter of a psychiatrist, so I've seen how when patients don't get the appropriate therapist or psychiatrist, how it can even sometimes derail them further. And that's not fair to them,
Mm-hmm.
especially when a clinician is not honest enough to say, I don't think we're a good fit. So I am glad that you did find someone that actually fits what you actually need and is adding to the the health that you're trying to achieve for yourself instead of taking away from it.
Yeah.
So so how long has it been since that journey started when you finally got the diagnosis, you're finally on medication? How long has it been since you been officially in the medication and
Mm-hmm.
behavioral therapy and what was that transition period like of not having ever been on medication? You finally realize, okay, like this isn't just a me problem. This is something that can actually be helped
Mm-hmm.
and adjusted medically, and I can get that support. But then that transition of needing to be on medication, I know for some people can be very jolting at first to go, I've never had to feel like this or think like this because I'm on these medications now. So what was that for you? What was that like for you in that season, and how long has it been since that season started?
Yeah, so it was about 2 years for me. So about 2.5 years ago, May of 2019 was when I got the diagnosis, and then a few weeks later is when I had it. I was able to schedule an appointment months in advance to kind of line the two up so that I could have my doctor's appointment really close to my test diagnosis. And so so it's been about 2.5 years since then, and I will tell you, it'll be very obvious what kind of medication I'm on when I tell this story, but I will say that the transition was pretty wild for me because I mean, within the first 30 minutes, first hour or so, I mean, life had almost completely changed. And what I mean by that is, I remember taking my first dose, standing in my apartment, and then I had to run I'd gone to the pharmacy, gotten the medication, went home, eaten some food, and then I went to take the first dose, and then I ran off to a haircut downtown. And that haircut at 26 years old was the first haircut in my entire life that I was able to sit still through the entire haircut and not feel uncomfortable. For me, sitting still is like, if you think I fidget now or think I move a lot now, it was way worse growing up. And I almost was in tears leaving the barbershop just because I'd never experienced that before. For me, it's physically painful to sit still. Like it actually hurts, and it feels like I'm being like tied down or restrained, and I have to like I have to break out and move. And it's really hard for me to describe that sensation. And so for me to be able to sit still and not have that problem was insane to me. And then and the next few weeks was just moment after moment of like, I sat through a meeting and didn't get up 10 times to use the restroom just because I had to move. I didn't have to drink an energy drink before any important meeting, and I could focus. I could actually focus and get work done. I I remember the second day I called what is now my current podcast co-host, but a good one of my really good friends, and he officiated my wedding. I called him the next morning to kind of talk about the diagnosis and everything. Within the first 2 minutes, he said, that's the first time in recent memory I can think of that you held a single train of thought for more than like 30 seconds. And I didn't even know that he felt that way. I had no idea that a lot of people apparently kind of felt that way about the way that I thought or communicated. And so for me, it was just I struggled with all of these different things my entire life and just thought other people dealt with them. Like ADHD was never a part of a conversation for me as far as like as a child. It just wasn't. My parents both worked full time. When they got home in the evening, they were tired. The weekends, they were tired. I was the youngest of three, but my older sister is 9 years older. My brother is 3 years older. Like by the time they got to me, it was just like, yeah, whatever happens, kind of happens. And I'm not saying that to be against my parents. That's not. I love both of my parents. They're amazing. My mom is my hero. She survived 3 different battles with cancer. I just mean that realistically, they're human, and there's only so much that you can do. And so they didn't notice some of those things in me, or if they did, it just never got brought up. And to some degree, I'm thankful for it because it means that I naturally learned how to cope with certain things, and I managed to basically hold straight A's most of my life and do the work that I needed to get done. But the other side of this, and this is what made that same process of like so proud that I was getting through these basic functions of life, was also intensely depressing for me because I realized just how much of my life could have been different and could have been easier if I had just known sooner. How many relationships could have been different. And that's not to say I regret necessarily, but rather the number of times and number of people that I've hurt in my life, knowing that now, understanding that some of the things I did were actually as a result of my ADHD, and medication won't help with those certain things. Those are the things that can only be dealt with through behavioral modification and therapy. Medication just helps you focus and zone in, but it doesn't help you with any of the other kind of symptoms. So it won't motivate you to get something done if you don't want to do it. But the second you start, it's a lot easier to finish. That's the kind of thing of like, you still have to provide the motivation and get up and do the thing. But once you start doing the thing, it's a lot easier to actually do it and finish it when you want to finish it. So it was a complete life transformation for me, but it also was a time of grieving and loss as I had to mourn I had to re-grieve all of the experiences as I thought of them that could have been different. And it took me a couple months to kind of re-get my bearing regarding that fact and just kind of re-accept that those were a part of my life. And that's just how life played out. And from there, it was with medication. I'm lucky that I also had a pro medication and pro kind of healthcare mindset already, and I had done a lot of research into medication and treatments. And so for me, it was less so a jump of fear and more so just like I'm ready to start dealing with this, and whatever comes, I if it's better than this, I'll take it. So yeah, it has completely transformed my life for the better. But that's not to say that the entire journey was all rainbows and sunshine and happy all the time now that I can focus and do tasks normally.
I I'm I feel strongly about your journey and the fact that yes, it was a good it was a positive decision that you made to say I want to figure this out even though this could end up being something that isn't actually happening and I have to cope with that. But then in the great revelation of oh my goodness, this is what it is and it has a name and I can talk to professionals about this, that you also still had to grieve. Like either way you were going to have to grieve something. It was either going to be grieving the idea that what we've been just calling it on the side isn't actually what it is, and having to cope with that, versus this is what it is, but man, life could have been so much better. That like that really hits my heart strongly, because I think a lot of us sometimes believe that, wow, if we have this great moment of clarity, that everything is just fantastic. But those of us that like to do a lot of self-reflection, and obviously you're a person who does that, that it allows you to also recognize where, even when you didn't in the moment realize that this maybe was the issue, being able to look back and have even a sense of remorse for the things that you had a role in playing
Yeah.
out. And there's a lot of maturity in being able to do that, versus you could have easily said, I have this diagnosis. Yeah, those things happened in the past, but that was because of my ADHD, and like not actually sit in the weight of what the undiagnosed ADHD did do, or didn't do.
Hmm.
Um, and just moved on with your life and called it like this epic, amazing transition in your world. But because you've taken the time to sit in that space and self reflect and recognize the contrast, you're able to have that bittersweet uh, experience and outcome moving forward. And even I feel like that's probably helping you recognize in other people, like, you might want to go talk to someone about that,
Hmm.
because this is not something that has to stay like this forever, and you can actually be a better version of yourself if you have those conversations. And if you're scared to have those conversations by yourself, like, talk to me. Like, I was scared too. And you're able to actually minister to people in that way, just by connecting on a personal level of having gone through an experience like that.
Oh yeah, I talk with parents quite frequently who ask me about the journey and medication and otherwise. And they're worried about getting diagnosed too early and the kid using it as a crutch or whatever. And I tell them my experience of wishing I had known earlier. One very clear example of this is there was a time in my life where I went through a period of not back to back, very but a number of short duration relationships. I'm talking a month or a couple months of between talking, dating, and then breaking up. And I just thought at the end of that, and why I ended those relationships was because I realized I didn't like the person. What I didn't know is with ADHD, there are really three primary motivators: urgency, novelty, and challenge. And for the when the novelty wears off, then an ADHD person will start to get bored or start to struggle with motivation to continue doing something. And so I still haven't figured out like the right word for this, but for lack of a better word, my brain wasn't just, it was quote bored with, it was looking for a new kick, a new excitement. Once the first excitement of a new relationship wore off and things settled in. And I, because I didn't know that, I took that to mean that I just wasn't interested in them. When in reality, it was just my brain having to adjust. And if I knew to anticipate that, which I did now with who was my current wife, I'm able to communicate, hey, if you start to sense that I'm not interested or that I'm not affectionate, or if like there's something in my behavior that changes, please let me know as soon as you do. It's likely has nothing to do with you, and it
Mm-hmm.
has everything to do with what's going on in my brain, and I may not even be aware of it. And I need and I want you to help. I need you to help me and be my partner in this, so that I don't cause you unnecessary pain. And which, no matter what, that's going to hurt if they start to sense that it is going to be a little bit of pain. But that's just one of the realities for me and the way it was expressed. So being able to tell parents this was huge. And I tell them, look, I'm not even saying you need to put your kid on medication. It's worth knowing the diagnosis just so you can figure out the behavioral side of this and put things in place to help them be successful. I got lucky. The degree I chose was easy. I was originally easy relative to the amount of like studying and tedious studying of terms to memorize and things to look up Mine was a lot more dynamic in research and writing and presenting, whereas and that my degree was theology, but originally I was going to do law. And I look back and I think, and I used to look at nursing majors and think like, how are you guys doing this? There's no way that I could ever do this. There's no way I could get myself to do all this or to sit for this long and study. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now I realize like if I had known sooner, I likely would have opened up my career path options for, depending or my choice of major and career path options as a result. And so there's any number of things that could have been adjusted and shifted. And it is so it's something that I highly recommend if people have joked about it in your life, or if you've joked about it, or if someone is worried about your child, like a teacher said something, or a babysitter or something, then I would say it's worth going down the road just so that you know and can adjust life accordingly, because that can make a major difference in just the direction that a child goes to.
Wow. Do you have advice for maybe adults who feel like it's too late to get a diagnosis, or it's too embarrassing to try to get a diagnosis at this point, and that they might just need to figure that out on their own? Like what would you do with
Yeah.
how would you speak to the wrestling adults in this situation?
For me, my moment came when I was starting to feel really overwhelmed, and I started to get really angry at the way I was living my life and the way that things were happening, and I felt like I didn't have control over. And I felt like I didn't have control over my own body and in some ways. And that finally led me to do it. I was just fed up of not being the only person in a meeting, not able to sit still, and looking around me and seeing that being normal for everyone else. I got sick of all of that. And so I decided to get diagnosed for that reason. That was what ultimately, when I shifted into that recruiting job and was sitting in regular staff meetings, that changed things for me in being around people who were operating normally again. And whereas pastoring was more so, it's self-directed work. And I was pastoring small churches that don't have big staffs or big facilities that require a whole lot of interpersonal interaction in an office setting like that. So if you're an adult who is wrestling with whether or not you should, I will say this: if at any point you felt in this conversation like that's me, or what did it for me was watching YouTube videos from the channel How to ADHD. She is an amazing YouTuber, and she's an excited personality, and she's a little quirky. I will give you warning on that. She's pretty high energy, but that's to be expected. But she's absolutely amazing. And watching those channels or watching those videos and similar videos, I never felt a sense of shame. Instead, I just felt relief. When I left my first testing or so the testing process was 2 appointments. The first was the initial consult, the second was the test. And I left the initial consult just feeling an overwhelming sense of relief that this wasn't just all in my head and I didn't have to continue living that way. And he was like, my suspicion is that you have this based on what you've told me, but we obviously need to go through the testing, process. So we're going to do that. But my suspicion is you have it. And what you're telling me seems to line up pretty well with that. And that just gave me a huge sense of relief. I was still scared, but it was a huge sense of relief for me. The other side of this, I will say, is that there's hesitancy towards medication, which of course, depending on health issues and any number of ways that your body reacts and interacts with medication, I would say talk with a doctor and make sure you're doing right by your body. For example, if you're someone who's prone to seizures or has had a history of seizures, don't take Wellbutrin because it actually lowers the seizure threshold, things like that. And there are those kinds of interactions that you need to know. I will say this, and Candace, you mentioned this earlier, and I'm not pinpointing it to make you feel bad or anything, but you had mentioned like you could be a better version of yourself. And that's not bad language or anything. The way that I tend to see this is it's not helping me be a better version of myself, but it's helping me be the me that I always wanted to be or that I was meant to be. It's helping me operate as the me that I have always tried to portray myself as and always felt I was falling short of. And it was a way of helping me operate normally. I don't view my inhaler as making me, for my asthma, a better version, but rather it's just helping me play sports the way everyone else does
Yeah.
and giving me a tool to do that. And that's that shift in the mindset. For a lot of people, they worry that this is going to change them or change their personality. And no, if anything, it just helped me focus in and hone in my personality. And I think the worst thing I was ever told, or the most offensive thing, they didn't mean to, but it was just like the thing that stuck with me the most, was when someone told me that I was a lot. And I fully get that. And I understand why they said it. And I don't want to be seen that way. And even now with the medication, now that I can focus and keep a train of thought going, it means that I can talk a lot longer, which is also a problem. So I'm still at risk of the same thing. But I will say, if you have any doubt about your journey, and if the worst you get by going down the testing route is a no. Like that's the worst you get is a negative diagnosis, and then you're already talking with someone who's likely qualified to help you deal with some of the things that you're dealing with that put you down, put you on that diagnosis path anyway. So if you're worried about specific behaviors, they can likely help you too, or point you in the right direction. Either way, you can get help for whatever it is you're feeling like, even if it's not specifically ADHD. But the other side of this, that's a big misconception with it, is people do think it has to do with attention. And I would say, A, it's the spectrum, but everyone experiences it differently. But B, it's more about attention regulation. That someone with ADHD can hyperfocus unmedicated. They can hyperfocus on something and block the world out around them. The problem is that they can't choose when that happens. And that, to me, was a major understanding of, like, this doesn't have to look like I can't sit still in meetings. This can look like I can't focus when I want to or when I need to focus. And that was a major mindset shift for me as well.
Powerful, man. Dude, Ryan, thank you so much for your candidness about this, especially in a season where we're trying to destigmatize mental health and it being just as important as taking care of your heart and your arm and your toes. So I really actually appreciate that. And I hope that those of you that are listening or watching, that you guys are really taking some of these things to heart, especially if it's not just affecting you, but it might be someone that you know that you're recognizing, oh my goodness, that's like my sister, or oh man, that's actually like my dad, or or my best friend, and they might not know, or my coworker, and they might not know. Just being more aware that these things, mental health is going to be with us forever because our mind is a part of us. And so the more that we can do to actually be honest and open about the things that we struggle with mentally and the ways that we want to improve those things or seek help on how to regulate and improve the capacity that we work at mentally. I think the the better we will be in stepping into the world and being confident to do what we need to do versus having that fear and not actually knowing how to talk about it because we assume that we're not supposed to. So
Mhm.
I again really appreciate that, and being the daughter of a psychiatrist, I'm always looking for people to talk more about this because it's so important. Um, do you have a way that people could reach out to you if they wanted to maybe talk to you more about ADHD or mental health or the journey in any
Yeah,
capacity?
absolutely. So I am on Twitter, Instagram. You can find me at real Ryan Becker, all one word. Turns out there's a lot of other Ryans in the world, so I'm the only real one. I'm the realist. That's probably the best way. You can also email me, ryan180becker@gmail.com. And that's another great way to reach out to me. I'm always happy to connect and talk if you just want to talk through and discover if that's a path for diagnosis that you want to go down. Happy to help with that, and or just happy to listen and connect with other people too. I think the biggest help to my journey has just been feeling seen. And if I can help someone else feel that way too, then for me that's an easy win. So I'm always happy to connect. And you can also find me on YouTube, just searching. The best way is just to search Absurdity, and then my name, and you'll find my podcast and my channels there. And you can connect with me on really any of those platforms. And I am always happy to talk.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. If there are any other topics that you want covered in the future, any situations that you might be going through, or even if you have a guest that you think would be really great for this show, please either send me a DM on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm on all those social media platforms. You can also text me at 859-800-3396. And let me know, how did you connect with this episode? Is this stuff that you're struggling with yourself? Is this something that you've recognized in people that you love? Let me know. I would love to hear from you guys as far as this topic. And if you want to further support, you can go to www.firstbasso.com and you can find all the different things that I'm involved in and ways that you can get involved too, including applying to be a guest on the show. So thank you guys so much for listening, subscribing, rating, commenting, engaging. I love hearing from you guys. You guys have been so great for the past year and a half and supporting me in this venture. And I look forward to continuing to connect with you guys and growing with you guys as we take our first Bassos together. So thank you guys so much. Ryan, you take care. Enjoy the holidays as a married man and having your first married holidays. That's going to be awesome. And I really hope all the best for you in all of your new endeavors and going into 2022. I really think there's some great stuff for you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for having me on. It's been great to connect with you and to share my story a bit too. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and start to your new year as well. I'm excited for some of the things that you've shared with me that you're working on, and can't wait to see what God's got in store for you then.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care, Ryan.
You too.
Bye.